blessing to be with you on this Tuesday of the Word of Encouragement. And I'm going to go to the Old Testament today in Nehemiah chapter 9. Nehemiah was a time, as far as the time that Nehemiah lived, was a time that was very difficult for the people of Israel. They had had the miracle of going back to the land. Zerubbabel led them and God worked, but they had become discouraged with all that still had to be done because it wasn't a large group that went back. And then God miraculously worked and overcame the opposition of the political leaders around and even of the kings of Persia, and they were able to build the temple. Haggai and Zechariah speak to the need there of them building the temple. And then later, Israel again sagged and wasn't believing God, and disobedience had come in, and Nehemiah had come. And the leadership spiritually of the Israelites stood up and reminded the people of all that God had done, all that God was working in their being there in the land, and all that he had done before. And as they were reviewing that, we read in verse 14 of chapter 9, and made us known unto them thy holy Sabbath, and commandest them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant, and gavest them bread from heaven for their hunger, and broughtest forth water for them out of the rock for their thirst, and promised them that they should go in to possess the land which thou hast sworn to give them. In the midst of giving the history of Israel, these leaders made it very clear that God had been very gracious to the nation of Israel. He gave them truth, which is what none of the other peoples had. They had the commandments, they had the precepts, they had the statutes. They had the way that is right to live that the Creator God had made for the human race. And then he met their physical needs, the bread, and it came from heaven, the manna, and brought forth water out of the rock, and enabled them to go into the land that they had been promised. And God had promised it to them, and he kept his promise. Now this was a reminder to them that the same God would do it again for them. The only reason that they were in the trouble that they were in is what it says in verse 16, but they and our fathers dealt proudly and hardened their necks and hearkened not to thy commandments. Friends, we can be encouraged all the time, knowing that God's ready to bless, to work, take even the trials to use them for great good, if we will surrender to him. It's never God's fault if things are not working out. It's always our fault. If we'll walk by faith, our God will keep his word. He keeps the promises found in his word. He will always meet our needs. He will give us truth. He will have a relationship with us. And everything we need to encourage us will be part of our lives. That's a great truth. It's only when we, and I like that term, harden our neck. In other words, we just don't allow God to work in certain areas of our life. We're not willing to believe him, or we just go our own way. That's when we get into trouble. That's when we're not encouraged. Friends, it's never been easy for God's people, Old and New Testament, during the church age. It's never been easy. But God's people can have the joy of the Lord and the blessing of God in the midst of great trial. The issue is whether or not we're letting God give us his word and provide for us and encourage us and walk with us, or whether we're going to do it alone and see God's way as something negative and not really trust him. You know, discouragement can come from a number of different ways, but it really always gets down to self and unbelief. There's no way of getting around it. So I want to encourage us today to take this exhortation from the leadership of Israel, and let's remember what God's done for us, and let's understand God will give us his word and help us understand it. He will meet our needs if we will trust him.